We're ready to go.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We're here to share information about the TDSB's personal mobile device use in schools policy draft and to hear from you. I'm John Chasty, Superintendent of Education. Also with us today is Jack Negro, Executive Superintendent, and Claudine Tyrell, Secondary Principal. And as you can see on the screen, there's several additional staff members online from different departments in the board today to assist with answering questions following our short presentation. Once we've gone through the slide deck, we will open it up for questions. Please use the Q&A function within Zoom to submit a question in writing. Also, for the Zoom link, we have interpreters, Slovak and Somali. To access this service, please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We have many participants today, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible. And thank you again for being here. So now we're going to get started. I'll start with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And I'm going to pass it over to Jack.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be with you today, along with staff from the TDSB for this first consultation session with the public. I wanted to give a brief background of how we got here and what's upcoming for us at TDSB in the development of this policy. So we had a resolution from the Board of Trustees on January 31st of this year, asking us to develop a mobile device policy. And shortly thereafter, in April, there was a similar directive issued by the Ministry of Education through PPM 128, the Provincial Code of Conduct, and School Board Codes of Conduct, which also instructed all boards in the province to come up with some guidelines or policies relating to mobile device use in schools, and really spelled out some of the restrictions that you'll see a little later on in this presentation. We engaged last spring in what we called a pre-consultation phase, where we met with different groups and sought input from the public in general on what a draft policy for mobile device use might look like, making sure that we adhere to the requirements in PPM 128. So we spent a few months gathering input, and over the summer, our policy team took that input and developed a draft policy, which we will give you details on today, in terms of what the mobile device restrictions would look like in our schools, beginning with the September change in the Code of Conduct, but also leading to the development of a full policy for TDSB in the month that we hope to have this done by January or February. So we are currently, as is noted at the bottom of this slide, in our policy consultation phase with a draft that began about a week and a half ago and will end on December 10th, 2024, after which time we will finalize a policy and then send it to our Board of Trustees for final approval. And so in the next few slides, Principal Tyrell will just walk you through some of the highlights of the draft policy as it currently exists for your feedback. Claudine?
Thank you, Jack. So I'm going to just start off with ensuring that everyone recalls PPM 128, and I just wanted to speak about how it looks in our school at the present moment. So PPM 128 has been implemented as of September 1st, and these are the minimum requirements for the cell phone mobile device usage in schools. So again, all members of the school community must not use personal mobile devices during instructional time And the exception is for educational purposes, directed by an educator, for health and medical purposes, and to support students' special education needs. So from grade 7 to 12, what it looks like is devices must be stored out of view during the instructional period. So the way it looks here at Humberside is that students are not able to have their phones, their mobile devices with them. They have to be out of view, either silenced or powered off during class time. From grade 6 and below, they must be out of view and powered off for the entire instructional day. So that's the difference between the two. And if an educator sees a mobile device, and this is for both grade 7 to 12 and 6 and below, they must ask the student to place it in a storage area designated by the educator, and it would remain there from grade 7 to 12 for the entire instructional period, and for 6 and below for the entire instructional day. And when we look at the responsibility, progressive discipline, and best practices, we always remind students, and this is something that we have done in our schools since the beginning of September, that students are responsible for their personal mobile device, how they use it, and the consequences of not following the requirements of the policy. And all of this has been included, as Jack mentioned, in the board's code of conduct and implemented again in our schools' code of conducts as well. And when we talk about progressive discipline, we are ensuring that students understand that it's, we are easing into it. September was a month to ease into it, but we also want to ensure that they also understand that with progressive discipline, we're looking at setting clear expectations for the responsibility of the students, the educators, principals, and the superintendent. We're looking at best practices, and we're really looking at responsible usage of technology. And we're also reminding parents. So at the beginning of the school year, administrators were sending out reminders and information to parents, caregivers, and guardians about the policy, about the code of conduct, and what it looks like in their respective schools. And we talked about best practices. So over the last 7 weeks, we have been meeting with administrators to talk about best practices. We've been meeting with our staff to talk about best practices, and we've been sharing that with our communities. Social media. And so we have blocked social media per the PPM. So there are many platforms that are not accessible via a student's personal mobile device. So they're restricted from the school Wi-Fi. Sorry, I'm going to correct that. So they're restricted from the school Wi-Fi. And so students are unable to access it with their personal device unless they use their data. The social media ban does not block students from doing text messaging. And so we always want to remind everyone that with the PPM, it applies to individuals and the entire school community. So anyone who is entering our schools are reminded of the cell phone mobile device use where it stands right now in the code of conduct. And we also remind students, and we've done this at our school through our conduct assemblies and in our guidelines with respect to cell phone mobile device use, on the fact that students are not able to record, take, or share non-consensual recordings or photos of members of our community. And we also want to ensure that that there is a distinguishment between the staff, students, and other members of the community, and that this PPM does apply to anyone entering the building. Again, the definition, because we've had we've We've communicated this quite a few times, but we always want to define what a mobile device is. And it refers to any personal electronic device that can be used to communicate or to access the internet. So it's not limited to a cell phone, it's a tablet, it's a laptop, and it's a smartwatch. So that is the summary of the PPM and the minimum requirement.
Okay, as we move into the device storage, certainly there were a number of questions prior to September that were leading into that. As we develop the TDSB cell phone mobile device policy in our schools and subsequent operating procedures, which are going to happen after the policy passes by the Board of Trustees, issues relating to storage are certainly coming up in the process of being clarified. So since September, the approach that we have taken as a system is that there's no common board-wide approach to storage of devices. Principals continue to share ideas amongst each other in terms of their best practices since the fall and prior to the fall, and are in the process of developing local solutions for this school year. In terms of where we are for the timeline, we just wanted to give you a sense of how this whole process plays out in the TDSB. So from May to July, we were engaged in pre-consultation, and that was with the school and community partners. And we did a couple of webcasts as well back then in May. We had student focus groups, and we also had another, in addition to student focus groups during the school year, we had a summer school group that was doing consultation and getting feedback from other students during summer school. The Board of Conduct was revised based on the ministry releasing their PPM, which was to be in place for this past September, with new information, and it was shared with all stakeholders. In addition to that, our policy department did a jurisdictional scan, which looked at what is going on in the rest of the world in terms of the development of a mobile device, personal mobile device policy. In August, the draft policy was created. It was prepared and shared with internal TDSB communities for input. And then it went to our governance policy committee. In September of 2024, to board went the draft policy. The draft policy was then approved by the Board of Trustees. In addition to that, the PPM 128, the new revised board code of conduct that came from the ministry, a directive from the ministry, went into effect in all schools on September the 1st. That brings us a little bit closer to now, which is public consultations. Once our draft policy passed on October 9th, started right at the day after the board meeting, and will end after 60 days on December the 10th. The updated draft policy is going to be shared with internal TDSB committees for approval after the 60 days. And we take a look at all of the feedback and what comes back from there. The detailed draft policy is available on the board's website. It encompasses all of the elements that Claudine talked about a little bit earlier. And we strongly encourage you to read it in its minute detail, to take a look and see what your thoughts are and provide us some feedback on that. January, February 2025 is when we anticipate the draft policy with any revisions that take place after feedback over the 60 days goes to the Governance and Policy Committee for approval. And then the draft policy will be shared at the regular board meeting for approval in either January or February. A question that we get from different stakeholders and internally as well is, how does a policy which is passed by the Board of Trustees and developed by the Board of Trustees differ from the PPM that the ministry gave us, the direction, the code of conduct, and the operational procedure, which is developed a little bit later on? So For example, some of the feedback we received from the over 22,000 surveys we had between May and July in the pre-consultation phase talked about a number of details, very specific details about the implementation of the ministry's code of conduct and otherwise. So what we would like to do here is just clarify and hopefully alleviate some of that confusion between the two. Is the process we're involved in right now is policy. And then after the policy passes the Board of Trustees, it goes to operational procedure. And we're going to ask Ron from our governance department to talk about the policy, the difference between policy and procedure, so that some of those thoughts you might be having about the details relating to this can be clear. Ron?
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. So today I just want to briefly touch on the difference between a policy and procedure. As you can see in the screen, we're currently in the policy phase. So policy is a statement of intent governing principles or end results adopted by the board, and it's intended to guide future actions. There are rules that apply system-wide. It's a non-negotiable, it's a must, and it's about what the board wants to achieve, their goals. As we said, it's approved by the Board of Trustees. A procedure, it delves deeper into the policy. It's a document issued through the Director of Education, and it governs the implementation of the board policy. So in this case, the cell phone use policy. And it's very process-oriented, a procedure, and explains how the policy must be implemented, the how-tos, who does what, when, and how. And it has a detailed instructions. So we touched briefly on the storage example. That's something that we hope to detail in our procedure, because it tells you who will do it, when they will do it, and how exactly they'll do it. So the policy is intended to give you the goals and the hierarchical achievements that we want to achieve, and the procedure breaks it down into instructions and the how-tos. Thank you very much.
So Ron, I'm going to pull up the draft policy, because people who joined our webinar today may not have had a chance to actually take a look at that. And I'm just wondering very quickly, it's a bit text dense, if you can just take us through some of the highlights so that everyone can get a sense of what it looks like. So I'm going to pull that up.
Sure, John. Thanks. Perfect. So as you can see, as John pulled up, this is our policy template, and you can see it's in draft format. We have a title of the personal mobile device use, and when it was adopted, which hasn't been in effect, when it was revised. The policy contains a rationale section, which details why we're developing this particular policy. It says it comes from resolution from the Board of Trustees, and that we're aligned with PPM 128 and our TDSB policies as well. And the objective outlines what are we trying to achieve with this policy? What are our goals? The hierarchical goals that we were talking about before. So to outline requirements for the appropriate use, to advance a conducive learning environment, to promote digital citizenship, and to reduce negative impacts of excessive screen time and social media use. And then we go to definitions. So the common definitions that are going to be used throughout the document. And as Claudine pointed out before, we have the definition of personal mobile devices there as well. Who will be responsible for the policy? So the main responsibility lies with the Director of Education, who's required to implement it, and then it goes to the Associate Director and then the Superintendent. The application and scope, who will this policy apply to? Students, staff, visitors in this case. And the guiding principles. So this is when we get into the meat of the policy itself. These are the provisions. So what are the main guiding principles of our policy? And I'm sure our viewers can take a deeper read later on. John, if you just scroll down a little bit. Thank you. And then we're committed to the student device program. So outlining provisions around that, our restrictions on social media platforms, as Claudine laid out in this presentation, and the use of personal mobile devices, the actual rules around it. And this comes straight from the PPM, as Claudine mentioned, as well. As you can see, instructional day versus instructional time. And we also embedded a section on school staff. what are the rules about staff using it? So we wanted to be a bit more clear in the policy. And as you can see, these provisions don't delve deep into the who's and what's and how's. They just tell you this is what we're trying to achieve, and the procedure will detail that. And next, you can see the duty to accommodate under the Human Rights Code. So what are the accommodation requests that we have to abide by as per the Human Rights Code? And then we also have a section on emergency situations, the threats to school safety, how should we use it, and we're aligning with our other procedure, which is the threats to school safety procedure, other emergencies, how the student can reach the office and use a phone if they really need to, or how the parents can reach out to the students. Enforcement, as Claudine mentioned, under PPM 128, it details progressive discipline, PPM 145. And then there we have a quick section on personal mobile device use, storage of how school principals can work with educators and establish their own protocols for the time being to determine storage. I just missed one. Sorry, John. Can you just scroll up? And then privacy considerations. So this aligns with MFIPA and all the privacy legislation that TDSBs abided by. And then next we have notifications, awareness, and training. So how will we let our students know, our staff know, our parents know? How will we train our staff? And one thing we're also doing is, as Claudine and Jack and John mentioned, it's constantly being monitored. We're listening from the staff about how we can better implement this policy so it works for our students and our staff. And then this ends the meat of the policy. And this is just a generic template, specific directives. It's to say the director can authorize operational procedures to implement this policy, and that the policy will be reviewed every 5 years in number Section 8, and then Section 9 is appendices, which we don't have, and the reference documents. What documents were referred in this body? So we have legislations, we have PPMs, and we also have TDSB board policies and procedures. Thanks very much.
All right, so in the last couple of slides, if you would just post those, please. Just want to talk about the actual implementation now. Next slide, yep. So we've recognized that since the beginning of the year, when we've implemented some of these requirements from the PPM, that we're really talking about a culture shift in our schools, and the time will be required to have everyone become comfortable with them. And so we've had what I would say a good first 6 or 7 weeks of implementation with some learning up front, and that's happened in all our schools in terms of students and staff getting used to the new requirements. But ultimately, we are really focusing our efforts on positive mental health and well-being, as well as an enhanced focus on learning in our classrooms and schools. And already the preliminary reports are really positive in the sense of focus on learning, and we'll continue to work on the positive mental health and well-being. And finally, the last slide, let's go to that. So we have posted the draft policy at the link on the screen. It's also available on our policy webpage, and as well as certain supports for mental health. The one that we access a lot is Kids Help Phone. So if you're experiencing some struggles with mental health with your children, that's a really good vehicle to address some of those. And certainly we have others accessible for students and families that we can recommend. So I'll turn it back to John now so that we can get into the Q&A session of this consultation meeting. So John, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Jack. So the very first question is, how and where can members of the public submit feedback on the draft policy? So that very last slide that we have there with the underlined, visit www.tdsb.on /mobile devices policy. That link will bring you straight to the landing page that has all of the communications relating to the work that has been done to date. Also on there will be the draft policy, as well as a link you can click on, which will provide you with a text box where you can provide a specific issue you would like to get on in terms of feedback on the policy. So we strongly encourage you to go onto the link and to provide us with your feedback going forward for the next just under 60 days. And then the next question is, how have the first few months of the school year been in terms of implementing the ministry's direction around cell phones? How have students responded? So we have two principals on with us today. We have Nicole Miller, she's an elementary school principal, and we have Claudine, who you've heard from already. And Nicole, I'm just wondering if you can comment how it's going. Tell us a little bit about what is the grade configuration of your school and how it's been going at your school so far. And then Claudine, if you can give your perspective as well, please.
Sure. I'm the principal at a middle school, so grade 7 and grade 8. We have 450 students, and we thought, this might be a challenge for some of them who are, very, very attached to their phone. But it has gone incredibly well so far. They seem quite happy to not have their cell phones during the instructional time. As grade 7 and 8s, and probably similar to Claudine's group of kids, they are allowed to have them at their lunch hour. So that might be why it's so much better during the day. I'm not sure, but they seem actually quite happy to not have it. And it has really, really alleviated a significant number of bathroom runs every day. I think because, they would go and connect with their friends in the bath, like text in the bathroom. So I have to say so far positive, and even have had very positive feedback from parents, feeling that their kids are more connected to school and getting more work done. So hopefully it's good.
Thank you, Claudine. So thank you, Nicole. Now on to Claudine.
I share the same sentiments as Nicole. I'm in a secondary school, and so students are able to use their mobile devices outside of the classroom. And so we're seeing students that, without hesitation, have it put away during class time. Of course, in the halls, they have them, but teachers have remarked what a considerable difference it's made in terms of students connecting with one another in class, being a lot more focused on what's happening in class. And a lot of times, as students have said, it was that whole fear of missing out on what's happening on social media and things like that. So it's been a really positive change for us here. I thought it was going to be, a little difficult at the beginning, but students definitely have responded well to it, and the feedback from our parents and guardians and caregivers has been positive as well, where they're saying that students are even finding ways at home to restrict how much use they actually have on their devices.
Yeah, thanks, Claudine. And we also have Dill Alvey. He's a secondary school principal, and he works with the Caring and Safe Schools Department. And when we did the pre-consultation in May and June, there were a number of concerns relating discipline from a system perspective that would happen as a result of these changes that came in from the ministry directive and the PPM. Dill, I wonder if you could just comment on what you're seeing from you and your colleagues, because there's 4 of you, I believe, see from a Caring and Safe Schools perspective in terms of discipline issues relating to mobile devices to date.
Sure, no problem, John. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to report that the efforts of the colleagues who work in our schools, principal colleagues, vice principal colleagues, have done real successful work with their students. There have been no escalations of mobile device issues to the Caring and Safe Schools Department, none at all to report, from kindergarten to grade 12. So the work that's happening at the schools of educating and like Jack alluded to earlier, the culture shift and the taking of time and the education seems to be working. And there have been no reports, like I said, that have escalated to our department in terms of discipline. Thanks, John.
Okay, thanks, Dill. Appreciate that feedback. We have another question, which is, when do you expect that the operational procedures relating to this policy will be established? And will there be an opportunity for members of the public to provide input into the procedures? So Ron, being a question that is more related to governance, what would your perspective be on this?
Thanks, John, and thanks for the question. So after we approve the policy, which we hope to do in Jan or February of 2025, it takes usually a year to develop a procedure. So we hope to bring forth the procedure to executives for the review by early 2026. And as per providing feedback and comments, we typically don't share our operational procedures because it's a internal document that we deal with in terms of the how-tos and the departments. But in terms of collecting feedback, I'm sure we can send something when we develop the procedure to the public to collect their feedback if they want to give their input. And additionally, during this policy phase, they can also provide procedural feedback that they would want in the procedure, and we can look into that as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Ron. And just something to note, we did receive a tremendous amount of feedback that went through our research department. It's taken them quite a while, and they continue to go through and analyze the over 22,000 surveys we received in the pre-consultation phase. And just note that some of that feedback very much relates not just specific to the policy, but also relates to things that could apply within the operational procedure. And Stephanie, I just see that you're online as well. Stephanie DeSousis works in our research department. Stephanie, I just wonder if you could comment briefly on that aspect of the survey and the data that was gathered in terms of it applying going forward.
Thanks, John. So we're very grateful to the over 22,000 individuals who did respond to the pre-consultation survey. Over the summer months when we reviewed and analyzed the responses, we did look at it from two perspectives. The first perspective to inform the draft policy writing, and the second lens or perspective to inform the eventual procedure when we get to that stage. So all of the contributions are greatly appreciated and will be used for the different stages of this process.
Thanks, Stephanie. And I was just wondering, our survey, those 22,000 surveys ended, and that part of the pre-consultation ended in June. We did have a program that your department was supporting that took place over the summer to gather additional information from students. And I know there's a report that's been prepared on that, and we're just in the process of looking at that. I'm just wondering if you could just briefly comment on that.
Sure. Yes, so for a few years now, the TDSB Center of Excellence for Black Student Achievement has been facilitating a summer program called the Black Student Summer Leadership Program. And as part of that program, or I should say that program provides students, high school students, with an experiential learning opportunity. Sometimes there's also a work placement, and also the opportunity to engage in youth participatory action research. And what that refers to is a very collaborative, action-oriented research project that is driven by student interests. And so we had a group of brilliant students this past summer who were particularly interested in the personal mobile device policy. So they conducted focus groups and surveys among their peers over the summer, and conducted a mini research project, so to speak, and shared their findings with the steering committee, and wrote a really great report that we're reviewing and incorporating as part of the policy revision process, and also looking to the report for procedural elements when the time comes.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. There's another question that's come in. If the draft policy is revised, updated based on the feedback received during the consultation phase, will the updated version of the draft policy also be provided to the public before it is finalized? So I'm going to turn back to you, Ron, in terms of how the governance aspect of this works.
Thanks, John. So after we collect feedback on the draft policy, it goes to the executives for their approval before it goes to the Governance and Policy Committee. So when we prepare the package for the Governance and Policy Committee, it becomes a live document. So we will be sharing with the trustees, and the public can also access that link for the Governance and Policy Committee, and they can take a look at the draft policy at that time. So it will not be finalized, but it will be going for final approval to trustees. So if anyone wants to have a comment or have that feedback, they can present it at Governance Policy Committee, or they can follow up with us and we can address it also at that meeting as well. So they will have an opportunity to take a look at it, not for 60 days, but maybe a week prior to us bringing it to the Governance Policy Committee through the agenda that we post publicly. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ron. We have another question on the question board, and it says the policy seems inconsistent with having an inclusive classroom for disabled children and doesn't seem to address the fact that some children are yet to be identified and may not understand their disability needs and rights. How is this policy being amended to address this? Just a couple of comments, and then I'm going to ask the two principals to comment on how it works for students with special education needs and IEPs. One of the exceptions that came in the ministry PPM had to do with students with special education needs and IEPs, and that a number of those rules and regulations relating to the use and accessibility of technology would not apply in those situations. It would be, I guess, one of the quote unquote exemptions that relate to that. But I would encourage the person who asked that question, if they have thoughts on what that might look like within the policy or operating procedure, to share that with us on the feedback through the website. In addition to that is, Ron had mentioned earlier from a human rights perspective, that we do have a duty to accommodate relating to human rights. And that would be another significant piece that would connect to that. So I would like to ask Claudine or Nicole just to comment on how you're working with students with special education needs within your own buildings and environments.
Thanks, John. So as you know, students with special education needs are supported by an IEP, and we have just last week completed our IEP developments to date of students who are on that list. And from there, we do one-to-one conferencing with students, and we also consult with parents in terms of speaking to students and determining what they need to best support them in their learning in class. And we have students who have indicated that they do need their mobile device for their learning. Either they need to still have possibly earbuds in to have music there for them while they're doing work. So we really emphasize the self-advocacy portion when it comes to supporting our students, but also our students that are still not sure of what their needs are. They might not be identified and have an IEP. And so we really encourage students to have conversations with their teachers about what they might need in order to enhance their learning in the classroom. So we're always open to that. We made it clear when we presented the code of conduct and the PPMs regarding the implementation of this PPM that the exemptions are always there in terms of special education needs, educational purposes, because we do have a population of students who they're multi-language learners, and so they might need their device for other purposes. And then as well as so educational needs, special educational needs. And so we really emphasize that as being part of the exemption. So this isn't a cookie cutter PPM, and we don't take it as that, and we support each student individually.
Yeah. Thank you, Claudine. And Nicole, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Claudine as well. And I'll just say that at my school, we have a couple of students who do use their phones all day to manage their diabetes. And it's really important, and they have it with them. And it's just about, having those discussions about like, this is what it's for, and this is why you have it in class. And the other piece with a lot of our accommodations, the one-to-one devices are able to sort of integrate some of those voice to text features and different assistive technologies that kids would use that that are outlined in their IEP. So we really haven't found a big conflict. But like Claudine said, if a student or a family comes to us and we talk about it, it's there is flexibility there.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Just as we're sort of talking about assistive technology, and we're talking about students with special education needs and looking at applications that relate to technology, I see Kevin's online, and Kevin works within our Information Technology Services Department. And Kevin, I wonder if you could just comment on how it's been going so far, because there was a lot of conversation prior to September about the social media ban. What's that going to look like within the TDSB? Which programs is it going to be? Will it prevent teachers from accessing certain types of apps, for example, that could be considered social media? Can you just comment on how you see it coming along from your perspective?
Sure. Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everyone. So once the initial block was put in place on the social media sites that were determined by TDSB staff, the restrictions went into place very late August, just prior to the start of the school year. And we have had, I would say personally, 0 complaints. We've had no requests to unblock any of those sites. We've had a couple of requests to block additional sites, which we did look at. Those requests were actually denied. So it's been very, very quiet in terms of the number of questions we've received or requests that we've received. It's been very smooth.
Thanks, Kevin. And the ministry put out a list of social media sites that were expected to be blocked. Did we do exactly as per what the ministry directed us, or did we supplement that?
We took that list as a basis, and then we consulted with some of the other GTA school boards. So Peel, York Region, Toronto Catholic, Dufferin Peel, I believe, and looked at some of the sites. So we've actually gone beyond some of the ones that you might expect to be on the list of social media platforms that were blocked. Mm-hmm. So like Instagram, for example. So, but we've gone beyond that to some of the platforms that might be considered a little bit more of a chatting kind of platform. Some that are based very specifically in certain countries. So we've gone a little bit beyond to try to really minimize the amount of distractions that are available through devices in school or web-based. Like I think Nicole brought up the point about the student device Chromebooks. So we also want to try to be cognizant of, we don't want to just replace the distracted activity from a mobile phone to a Chromebook. So that was an additional lens that we had when we were looking at those websites.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate your feedback there. And we have another question that's come in. Most law reforms and acts agree that recordings can be done as long as one person agrees to the recording. Does this policy supersede legal documents acts? Genuinely curious, as there seems to be discrepancies. I'm not a lawyer and welcome insights so that I can feel comfortable with the policy. Well, I'm definitely not a lawyer. However, Dill, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot, and I know you're not a lawyer either, but I know you see these things come up sometimes in caring and safe schools, and understanding we might not have an answer to this question if we don't have the legal perspective on it.
Yeah, John, definitely not a lawyer. We do see this all the time in caring and safe schools when one party has recorded another person without their permission, leads to bad feelings, and so on and so forth. What we've been dealing with especially is when it's one thing to record someone without their permission. The second part of it is what they do with that recording. For example, if they post it and in a site that's where people make comments on it or that sort of stuff, that's where we really get involved, and we start talking to kids about the impact on well-being, and we encourage kids to take it down right away. So those are the things. Recording is one thing that we really can't control when one party records another party and we don't know about it, but we do a lot of education with kids, students in our system, about the impact of recording people without their permission and just about empathy and good behavior and good best practices. So that's where we are with Caring and Safe. In terms of legal position, I'm not really sure. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dylan. I completely understand why you wouldn't be able to comment on the legal question or aspect of it, but it's a good question, and it's something that we will bring forward and see what that interpretation is of that.
And John,
If I may,
sorry.
that's something certainly that could come through the consultation in terms of, you know, people's desire in that respect around any policy direction that they want to provide for us, subject to legal opinions, of course, but that's part of this process.
Thanks, Jack. And Ron, you wanted to say something as well?
Yeah, thanks, Jack and Dale. I just wanted to add in our policy, in our draft policy, there's specific language saying one cannot record without explicit consent. And obviously, as Dale was saying, you can't always control that. But this is also language taken from the PPM, the ministry direction, in terms of audio and video recording. So there needs to be explicit consent from both parties involved. And of course, this is not always abided by, but we do have language there concerning this. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Ron. I'm not seeing any other questions up on the board, and we're at 1:52. So I'm just wondering, Jack, do you have any comments you'd like to make before we move into close?
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks everybody on screen for supporting this consultation session, and thanks everyone out there viewing it today for your presence and participation. We certainly would want to hear from you if you have any thoughts on the policy draft that we have in circulation. And of course, there is a mechanism for you to do that online. Please feel free to share that information with your friends, with fellow parents, or others that might be interested in contributing to this policy consultation. And we look forward to using all of this input to develop our final policy. And what doesn't make it to policy, as Ron outlined earlier, may make it to procedure. So all input is valued in this process. So once again, thank you, everyone. And hopefully you'll be giving us your feedback and keeping track of the progress of this policy development leading to the final policy. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. And I spoke a little bit too soon, so we can take one more question that just came up on the board. Can you share how parents can request to block sites? Also need support to help students remove students' content from sites. Example, student signs up with Instagram using TDSB Chromebook, but this means that a student uses their TDSB email and the student's email city for safety's sake. Any help, it looks like any help would be appreciated. So Kevin, this sounds like a question for your area that connects.
Sure. So if there's a request to submit a site for consideration of blockage, that needs to come from a school staff member. So it can be a teacher, can be a principal, etc. So I would suggest to connect with whomever you feel comfortable doing so at your local school. There needs to be a rationale for it. So sometimes people will say, this site is distracting, or this site is not appropriate. So it needs to be a fulsome explanation. So why is it inappropriate? Does it contravene a TDSB policy? Those are the kinds of things we look for when a request is submitted. In terms of a student signing up to an external service, so like Instagram, using their TDSB account, so they're the only individual who can change that. So you keep that same example. If students use their TDSB email address to sign up for Instagram, say a year ago, the district isn't able to contact Instagram and say, please change that to a personal email address. That we don't have a relationship with Instagram for that kind of request. It's the individual student who will need to go into, like, say, their profile in that example, change the email address to their personal one. So that's not something that the district is able to assist with.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Appreciate that. Okay, and so that would be our final question, and that brings us to the end of our first public webcast. The next one is Thursday from 6:30 to 7:30. So as Jack said, please spread the word and hopefully encourage some folks to participate and provide their feedback. And with that, thank you so much for taking your time this afternoon and joining us, to all of the panelists for their feedback, and to all of the participants from our stakeholders in the community. Thank you, and have a great rest of the day.